So our topic today is buying a vacation home or a second home. And as I look out my window right now here in Dallas, it is gloomy and rainy, and it would be sure nice to be at a beach or in the mountains or at a lake or something. So I can totally get the appeal right now. So buying a second home or a vacation home. And I could make some fancy PowerPoint. I just like to kind of use just real simple talking points to just kind of keep us on track for things that I know that people ask often when it comes to second homes and things that they need to understand with second homes. So first of all, people need to kind of understand this difference of what is primary home, what is second home, what is investment property. I realize for some people that seems very obvious, but it's not always obvious. Primary home. That's the home that, of course, we predominantly live in. We tend to think of that as the house near where we work, where we go to school. That's kind of obvious. Second home is the technical definition, is a home that you can rent out a second home, but you must live in it at least 14 days of the year. Okay, so you're not going to buy a second home and rent it out for a whole year. Okay, you might do short-term rentals, Airbnb, Vrbo, things like that. Assuming, by the way, as you're probably aware, there are a lot of been regulations with different communities, different HOAs regarding Airbnbs and Vrbos, or vacation rental by owners. So assuming it's in an area that allows that, but that's more because of that area, that community, if they allow it or not. But as long as that's allowed, you could rent it out short term, and you're probably going to still live there at least 14 days of the year, and maybe much more. Okay. Investment property. This is a property that you buy, you never intend to live in, at least not for the immediate future. You intend to do long-term rentals right away. Okay. You're going to do a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease or a 6-month lease or something like that. Okay. Purely bought for the intention of renting it out. You're not going to live there. Okay. Now, there's sometimes a thing that we'll hear sometimes people say, well, I heard that a second home has to be over 50 miles from your primary home. In some cases, that's the case, but not necessarily. I have done second homes that are within 50 miles of where the person currently lives, but it has to seem logical. I had a client that I've done several loans for them over the years. They live in Fort Worth. That's their primary home. They bought a house at Eagle Mountain Lake, which is a little bit north and to the west of Fort Worth. But it is definitely within 50 miles, but it's logical. They are going to go there. They're going to live there some, and they're also going to rent it out some, but they have not done anything wrong. It's far enough that they would, not just commute. They want to be able to have their boats and do all that stuff. So not necessarily, although sometimes that is a question that comes up. Let's keep going here. With a second home, you need a plan that you'll probably need to do at least 10% down. Now, there is a whole difference here. There's what's called a conforming loan. This is a loan that conforms to the rules of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And then there's what are called jumbo loans. These are loans that don't have to conform to the rules of Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Those are generally larger loans. So currently, by the way, right now, the threshold is $726,200 for the loan amount. That's the loan amount, not the purchase price. That is going up to $750,000 for next year. That's already been announced. Every once in a while, these will change, usually year to year. Typically in November, we've learned a little earlier this year than normal. So that threshold is going to be $750,000 again for the loan amount. Somebody could buy a $2 million house and have a loan amount under $750,000. Granted, that's a big down payment. Okay, but generally you need to plan for at least 10% down when buying a second home. You do need to plan, unfortunately, that rates and closing costs are going to be higher on a second home. By the way, this has not always been the case. Okay, they were always a little bit higher, but we saw a really dramatic shift. I'd have to look back at the exact calendar here, but sometime during COVID. Let me tell you, it's kind of interesting, the reason. I find that people find this reason interesting. during COVID, second homes became very popular, very in demand. We had people who realized that, wow, they've been at their job for a long time, and they realized, wow, this job can be done remotely pretty easily, and they liked it. And so we saw a big surge in second homes. Well, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I could give you a lot of reasons of what they do or what their purpose is, but I'm going to keep it simple. They're like the governing body of lending land. They make the big rules. Okay. And you want to generally follow the big rules because they've got the best rates, the best terms, okay, the best loan types. Well, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they are corporations, but they're kind of these like government endorsed corporations. Well, the government allows them to exist with one of their primary functions. They have multiple functions, but one of their primary functions is to encourage home ownership. That's good. Like we would all agree, that's a good goal. One of their goals is not to help people buy lake houses or to help people buy a house in the mountains. And I sometimes, when I'm working with a client that, is buying a second home, I will tease them a little bit and I'll say, the goal of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is not to help rich people buy second houses. Okay. Now, I realize some people who buy a second home go, well, I'm not rich. Well, I mean, you may not feel that way, but bear in mind, not everybody in America can have two homes. What a blessing if you can. Okay. What a blessing that that's an opportunity you have. So not everybody gets that opportunity, but that makes sense. So one of the things that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac saw happening is their ratio or their percentage of loans that were to second homes and investment property was getting too big. It was getting bigger than they wanted. So they go, wow, that's not our main thrust. We need primary homes to be our main thrust. So they adjusted the rates and the fees that are connected with second homes. Okay. So it doesn't, by the way, it doesn't matter how strong of a borrower you are. You could have the best credit. You could have the best debt ratios. It's still going to be higher rates and a little bit higher fees on a second home. So this brings up a question. Is there a way to improve that a little bit? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Let me tell you what I mean. Let's keep trucking here. One of the interesting things that happened through COVID is we saw a lot more people who were able to work remotely. Now, what does that mean? Now, I'll give you an example of an occupation that's probably never going to be able to get to work remotely. Say they're a surgeon, okay? They're an optometrist. Well, they've got to be able to see their patient and go be able to, do the diagnosis. I went and had an eye appointment, and is this better or that better? Can you read this lowest line? What can you read there? Well, they need to be in the presence of that. That's not a job that can really be done remotely necessarily, okay? But other jobs can be. Well, we also saw a bit of an explosion of some companies allowing those employees to live anywhere, okay? Seen a lot more of that. I had a closing just 2 weeks ago. This buyer is in the oil and gas industry. He's able to work from anywhere. His company said, sure, you can live wherever you want. And they bought a home in Waco. And they bought it as their primary home. Their goals are that eventually it is going to become their primary home. Okay. But because he can work from anywhere, his employer said, sure, that can be your primary residence. He doesn't have to come into the office all the time. It totally worked fine. Okay. So we just, as a lender, have to get something that says that employer allows you to work remotely. You don't have to be where that company is. And that has happened a lot. Okay. I'm sure you're aware of that. So it's created new opportunities. Maybe it's actually not going to be your second home. Maybe it's going to become your primary home. Another way this can benefit people is many times, and this is unusual to think about, many times the second home may be a more expensive property than your primary home. Well, wouldn't you probably know that you get some property tax exemptions or discounts on the home that you have your homestead exemption on. Well, wouldn't it make sense to have that on the more expensive property so you get more of a benefit there? Yes, it would. So that doesn't work for everyone, but I have had situations where it easily works. And what they think in their mind at first it's their second home. They go, well, yeah, really, that could be my primary home. And I may still own my house here as well. That's fine. Okay. Might even decide to take their current home and turn it into a rental. Who knows? Something to think about. Timing to buy and a few precautions with retirement timing. Every situation is different. Okay. So I cannot make a blanket statement here. I have talked to clients who have said, and I do a lot of work with financial planners as well, who have been discussing a client, and they said, well, they kind of think that when they retire, they're going to buy a lake house. Great. By the way, they may be totally fine to do that. However, of course, most of the time, when people retire, they're going to have an income shift. And it could be potentially because of their income shift, they wouldn't qualify to buy it after they retire. So maybe what they need to do is do their planning before they retire, maybe 2, 3, 4 years before. Think about what is that next step for them with housing. Are they going to want to have that lake house or the house at the beach or whatever it is? And maybe do that while they have the income now. By the way, there's also some other advantages to that. They can kind of test the waters. They could, no pun intended when you're buying a lake house, but they could be able to buy that place and begin to see, do they really like that community? Does that feel like what they want to do? Great. If it is, then what a wise decision. They're already able to buy it. They still live here. They bought that as their second home. And then when the time comes and they do want to retire, they feel really confident. And maybe they are going to sell their current house and they're going to live there permanently, whatever that is. Okay. So there's just some things about with timing. I have had situations, it's kind of sad, but unfortunately, where somebody gave notice for retirement and they say, okay, I'm ready to go buy that lake house, and they don't qualify. And so we're having to look at all kinds of unusual steps, and maybe they have to take more from their 401k or their IRA than they were ever intending to do. So I would sure like to have those discussions well in advance, not too late in the game. Okay. So especially when it comes to retirement, I think it's something to be thinking about. And most of the time I find that when people are planning that in retirement, they're going to do a lake house or whatever, they know that well in advance. Let's talk about it. And let's talk about maybe they're going to be totally fine and they can do it whenever they wish. So just a good have a plan. Renting your vacation home. I've mentioned this before, but it is perfectly fine to do short-term rentals. You could buy a second home and you could do Airbnb, Vrbo of it. Again, the main thing is you must be able to live there at least 14 days of the year. Now, there are some things there you may need to double check with your home insurance provider, and there may be some things you need to be sure that you shore up with that. But from the lending side, that's perfectly fine. It just can't be on a long-term lease. Okay, you need to occupy it part of the year. And many people occupy it way more than that 14-day threshold. Okay, so something to think about. I have had people who bought a second home and have made more money on it than they would if they bought a rental property. Something to think about. I've had that with North Carolina, Colorado, several different properties. So something to think of. That's not for everybody. Some people don't want to deal with the management of that. You definitely might have to have some outsourced paid management for that, but it's something to consider. I want to back up just 1 minute on this, and I think I'm going to put this in a different point here, but about this precautions with the retirement timing. I've had a few situations, not often, where people have bought a second home and they are pretty sure, like, this is really what I want to do, and this is going to be my retirement home. And that's fine. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to do what they want to do, but I've seen them buy it and regret it. And let me tell you those instances, just because I want people to think this through. I've had a situation where someone bought, they go, oh, we've always dreamed of living on like 5 or 10 acres and being out in the country. And sure enough, they bought one. And then they retire, they get out there, and this is what I heard. Now, it wasn't at first. Go, wow, we're out in the country. I mean, we are out there. And they were. We have to go to a lot of doctor's appointments and stuff like that. We got to drive an hour one way every time we needed to do that. And they realized what was kind of their dream wasn't really that great of a dream. So, hate to be a dream killer, But I do think people need to think through what's life going to be like in that next stage. And is this going to be a good house for that or not? I had a situation actually 1 month ago. Client had bought a property in Colorado, beautiful home, loved it. Their family would go up there, their children and grandchildren, was great. Except one thing, the wife kind of had a little bit of breathing issues. Well, this house happened to be at a little bit higher altitude near Breckenridge, Colorado. Breckenridge already is at a high altitude. Well, this house was higher than that. And it just really would wear her down, and a lot of their friends that would come visit them. And they realized, we need to sell this one. And they did. They did make good money on it, by the way. And they bought a house still in Colorado because they've loved and enjoyed that with their family, but at a elevation, I think it was like 5,000 feet lower, 4,000 feet lower. Way different, just way easier on them. So sometimes people have to think through things about what's that going to be like. So try to play that forward, because it sure is nice if it can be a long-term house. Oh, this is exactly that point. Sorry, I should have moved the screen down. Just think about where you're buying. Will it be a good long-term second house, or is it intentionally meant to be short-term? Like, hey, I know this lake house, it'll be fun, but the time's going to come, I'm not going to want it. And then you sell it. Great. That's fine. That's not a problem. You just need to know that and be thinking about it, what that means and what's good for you. Okay. Guys, that's really the core of what I wanted to share in this time. This is one of the quicker ones because it's really the same process. When somebody buys a vacation home, they still have to have debt ratios that work to be able to carry both homes. They still have to have all those things, but those are the key points that people need to know when they buy a second home. I am always available to talk and answer questions about this. We do lending in a lot of different states, not all 50 states. Most lenders don't do lending in all 50 states, but there's like, I don't know, 25 that we do lending in. So we can help in most states. And even if I can't, I can make some connection points for you and give you some pointers on those states and be able to help you, guide you as to what your options are. And sometimes this is just something people want to just explore. They don't know that that's what they want to do, but it's something they've been playing with and thinking about. And I'm happy to talk through that. There are pros and cons of them. And I've seen it play out both ways. I've seen people want to do that home where it's the long-term house and they're going to pass it down to their children and grandchildren as a retreat. That's awesome. And I've seen people who go, you know what, this is just my little fun thing for a couple of years, 5 years, 6 years, or whatever, my health will allow. And then I'm going to just sell it. Okay. Everybody's got a different goal. There's no judgment on any one of those. Harold Smith, Legacy Mutual Mortgage. Let me know if I can help, or if you want to discuss this further. Right over my shoulder here, you'll see that QR code. You can click that or take a picture of that. All my contact info is there. I'm happy to set up a time to talk about this specifically with you. Hey, we have other sessions in our webinars. You're welcome to join in on those. You've probably seen those from the emails that you've got. I'm going to do some other publication about those. We've added a few other topics as well. But hey, I hope you have found this useful. Have a great day. Bye-bye.